Good evening, everyone. This is your host, Mark, with Skinny E Media, here to celebrate everything that's great and holy about the Ninja Tune sound, with a little bit of warp mixed in for good measure. And here we have Kevin Folks, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, aka Strictly Kev, of DJ Food in its current iteration. How do you do there, Kev?
I'm good. Nice to see you again, Mark.
Nice to see you too. How it came about that I got to know one of the legends behind the Ninja Tune label was I got to see at the Faith and Strangers Music Club in Margate um, his AV set O is for Orange, which is influenced by one of my all-time favorite bands, Boards of Canada. Who could go wrong with that? And I thought to bring him on here to discuss a little bit about the AV set itself with time.
Be my guest. Ask away.
All right, then. Well, on my end, I'll say for starters, the genesis of this project. I mean, how difficult was it to get permission with Mike and Marcus or the Warp label to work on this? Because I'm sure they're probably a bit guarded, but or they've maybe been like, all right, go with it.
Well, the thing was that it started in 2013 when a friend of mine, Josh, who runs the I Love Acid nights, started a night. He did a one-off night. It was Tomorrow's Harvest had just been released, and it was very close to June the 9th, sorry, which is the Boards of Canada track title. And he put on this night to basically sort of celebrate the fact there was a new Boards of Canada album. Asked me along and a couple of other DJs, and we put together Boards of Canada centric DJ sets. And I don't think there was a visual element involved at that point, but I really enjoyed it and sort of started to sort of work out a larger scale set on this. Then started, I think I did a mix in like 2013 or 14, which was like a video mix for Solid Steel, of this DJ set. Then a couple of years later, I was asked to tour this, and so I put together the full audiovisual thing, and that sort of brought up the question of the sort of not the legality of it, should we say, but the fact is, as a DJ, you can play anything. No one's going to hassle you for playing their record. But when you're going on tour and you're playing a lot of people's records and it's being not advertised as Boards of Canada, but it's a Boards of Canada is the theme and the hook. I thought what would be really, at least common courtesy, would be to contact Mike and Marcus and say, look, is this cool with you guys? And I didn't have a direct email from them, but I did have Chantel Pasamonte, Mira Calix, who's an old friend of mine who worked for Warp and was signed to Warp. And I got an email to them through her, to basically say, can I have your blessing? And they said, yeah, that's fine. I have met them before. I met them in the late 90s. And we hung out a little bit because we played a gig together in Sheffield in, I think, 97. And, they knew me. They knew who I was. I've done things involving their music before for radio. So it wasn't a little bolt out of the blue, But I couldn't call them, I wouldn't say they were like great mates of mine or anything like that. I've met them once. So, we've had a little dialogue back and forth over the years. But yeah, I got the word back and said that's fine. And so that was the permission I needed, really. I'm not selling this mix at all. It's more of a case of I don't know. It's not that far off a tribute act in some ways, but I don't really want to be seen as a sort of tribute DJ. I'm not playing entirely their music. It's their music, as you saw and heard, wrapped up with other things that are of a similar genre.
That's the vibe I got about it because for people who might be uninitiated, while it does have the encompassing theme of boards itself, other artists are featured on the AV set as well. That almost lends a bit of a surreal quality that people nowadays, or in the Spotify world, call hauntology, which is a phrase I've never even heard of before, but it seems to be popular within the sort of odd parts of the dark web in pertaining to electronic music, where they use sort of old bits of music or voices and public information film samples and create almost like a weird echoey, distorted sound, which makes for intriguing listening, but also could give you nightmares. But I thought that was quite clever the way that you did it, because I know in with context with Ninja Tune, they've always had that element of sort of twisting around things from the past to quite interesting effect, oftentimes satirical, like with Hexstatic and the cold cut stuff with Let Us Play. I
Yeah,
unfortunately too many times I've seen the music video for Timber, and every home is a prison. I played it on the radio show one time, but I'm not going to
yeah.
go too much into detail on that.
Well, the common thread between something like Board's music and, let's say, the music that Ninja Tune was originally known for is that there's an element of sampling there, especially in the early Boards of Canada, the first couple of albums, where they sampled pieces of dialogue from Sesame Street and things like that. The bass line for Aquarius is sampled, and I highlight things like that by playing things that you'll recognize if you're a Boards fan, but you might not know the source of it. So that was the impetus for the beginning of the mix. But I pull in things that I feel are sort of adjacent in style, or of sometimes tracks boards have remixed, like Meat Beat Manifesto. And so I think they possibly would have been influenced by, for instance, Autechre or the Human League or Grandmaster Flash and things like that. I know that they're hip hop heads because when I DJ'd with them, they were playing electro and stuff like that from the 80s, and they're similar age to me. But their methods are incredibly different. And you mentioned hauntology earlier, and whilst that's really a product of the noughties, with labels like Ghostbox, who draw from a sort of fictional, imagined past, a ghostly past, where you hear things that you remember, but you can't quite pinpoint the source of. I think in some ways, Boards are one of the bands that could be seen as the godfathers of this movement, because they do exactly the same thing. They draw from a sort of slightly psychedelic, fictionalized 60s and 70s sound palette, which, if you are their age and grew up in those years, that you would have seen and recognized things.
Oh, absolutely. I know for the main source inspiration is NFB,
Mm,
because if I'm correct, they grew up a little bit in Calgary, Alberta, um,
mm.
and their father worked on the Saddle Dome, and that element of those information films and those little animations that National Film Board of Canada used to be known for was a great source of inspiration. And I partly got into the band because my grandfather was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, and
Right.
there's that prairie influence, and also because I'm obsessed with the weird, quirky elements of that country itself. There is that weird little reference in one of their songs that's called 60-10, which literally is 70 en français, 60
Mm.
plus 10. So, yeah, it
Yeah.
makes for interesting conversation. It's the same thing with like Future Sound of London. I got into them just because they're not really from London, they're Manchester, Mancunians. But
Yeah.
it's the geography aspect that throws you off a little bit. Funky Porcini, he's not even Italian, even though he lived there and was in some Italian stuff,
Yeah.
like King's Cross, I think. But I'm not going to try to go too much into a tangent here. I'll reel things back a little bit in. But it's
Yeah, I
always
think James has lived all over the world. James Funky Porcini, so he's got a lot of different influences. I think he lived in San Francisco for a bit too. But the thing that I like about Boards, and as you referenced there for Future in London quite a lot, is there's a lot of the thing with Boards, I think, is that they've got this they've got a lot quite they're serious music, but there's a playful element in that they include a lot of childlike samples, children's kind of voices and things like that, which gives it a kind of slightly ghostly element.
I would argue with that too. It's at first a bit surreal, but it also makes it stand out from what back in the day they used to just associate all electronic music as pretty much like Two Unlimited or Adamski and Alternate, which are great groups, but that's not really representative of all electronic music.
No,
I think
definitely.
that's the charm behind BOC. It goes without saying. Kind of like with Ninja Tune, I got into them particularly because of Sky. I used to listen to Music Choice, and they played Chroma Key Dreamcoat from Campfire Headphase on that digital radio station. When you tune it off past MTV2, MTV Dance, Scuzz, Flaunt, Box, and Volt. I shouldn't know these names, but I do. And I first heard the ding, 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 and then the what on earth is this? And why is it called Canada? I couldn't believe
Mm.
it. And then a little after, I started hearing Wagon Christ and Amon Tobin. I was like, what is this music? And that was a little after I even got in like Roykstop and Massive Attack. And I was just like, this is what I call my own. I love that sort of what they call trip hop. I know people in the industry don't like that word, but
I don't have a problem with it at all.
I'm gonna call it for what it is. You know, sort of ambient, down tempo, almost trip hoppy type music. No offense to Jeff Barrow or Daddy G and 3D if they're listening, but I'll reel it back in and go on the
Well,
next.
the interesting thing about that is, you know, trip hop was first coined around people like DJ Shadow and Mowax, and it was this, you know, trippy hip hop sort of thing. I wouldn't necessarily call Portishead or Massive Attack trippy hip hop. I would call stuff like Major Force or some of those weird Beastie Boys instrumentals on some of those albums more trip hop, or even Wagon Cry stuff. But um, you know, I haven't got a problem with the word trip hop. I've sometimes got a problem with the music it's used to describe because I don't think it's particularly trippy or psychedelic, you know.
I could see that. I mean, I could even call Digital Planets a bit trip hop as well, because that jazz influence. There's, if anything, Digital Planets probably would have made a great contender on the Big Dada or Ninja Tune label had they still been a thing back then.
Yeah.
But you know, that's wishful thinking. Or Tribe Called Quest, US Free. I don't know. I could be wrong on this. I love that sort of jazzy, melodic hip hop sound to it. There's a crossover element. With
Definitely.
Wards, some people say it's hip hop. You know, I kind of get that weird little bit there,
Mm.
especially when you hear a song like "Rule the World," which sounds like "Rule
Mm.
the World," because someone said, "Like, you could sample that on Wu Tang," and I'm like, okay, because Wu Tang done a song called "The Mysteries of Chess Boxing," which sounds like something that could have been on there and could have even been on a Solid Steel mix.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe
Yeah.
you did. But reeling back to things, from your perspective, do you see a great deal of overlap between Warp and Ninja Tune? I do, although Warp's music journey tends to be a bit more mathematical and electric. Well, Ninja Tune's a bit more organic and a bit more sort of smoke a doobie, unwind. It's illegal, kids, in this country.
I think you've got a similar opinion to me about those, you know, the organicness of the Ninja Tune stuff. I mean, when I'm saying that, I'm talking about the 90s Ninja and maybe the noughties Ninja. I don't think Ninja Tune today is the same label it was back then about the stuff you're talking about. But you know, back then, Warp in the 90s there was definitely a lot of crossover because you know, we were getting remixes from Square Pusher and Autechre and people like that, and they were getting remixes from us, DJ Food, Cold Cut, and you know, we were there was a little bit of cross pollination between the labels. I mean, I mixed the compilation for them with PC from DJ Food, Black, which came out 30 years ago nearly, which was a, you know, a mix of Warp's back catalogue at that time. So you know, and as I mentioned earlier, Mira Calix, my friend, you know, worked for them and recorded for them as well. So there was always a foot in that camp for me anyway.
I would agree with that. Well, before anything, for people who are listening, Mira Calix unfortunately is no longer with us anymore, and I actually been in contact with her on a few occasions through Twitter, and she'll be very remembered. As will Andrew Weatherall as well. He's no longer with us. I think they were both sort of connected with a Ninja Tunish type artist that was on Warp for a long time called Red Snapper, who I've interviewed as well, and in some respects, the most Ninja Tune artist on Warp is Red Snapper, and the most Warp artist on Ninja Tune probably is like Amon Tobin and his
Yeah, I agree with that.
Two Fingers side project. I know he's not on it anymore. He's on the like No Mark, I think, but I
That's his
still
own label, I
consider him
think. Yeah, yeah,
an honorary member of the collective, if you know what I
yeah.
mean.
I'd say Nightmares on Wax would fit on Ninja definitely back in the 90s too. And we remixed him and we remixed Red Snapper as well. So, there was definitely crossover there.
Oh, definitely. Everyone's got their own little styles and overlaps. If as far as anything with like in context of Boards of Canada, um, that one's a little bit tricky, but Aquarius has that sort of funk sound. At least to me, I thought they actually played the bass guitar. I didn't know it was a Gout McDermott sample itself. And Gout McDermott is probably most known for, at least to people with that Busta Rhymes, Woo Ha, I Got You on the Check. Classic stuff.
Yeah.
And
Aquarius comes from Hair, which is a Galt McDermott soundtracked, um, Broadway musical from the 60s and 70s. And, from the track called Aquarius, which is, they didn't even hide the sample source there. They called it the same as they sampled.
well, it probably influenced them as when they were young seeing it, although it is quite racy from what I was told. My mother is of that sort of generation because she was born in the 60s, but she remembers a lot of that stuff. I tried playing her boards on a few occasions. I don't think she quite understood it, although when she did hear one of the songs called Bass Free, she almost
Mm.
thought if the people who made it, they were like soul brothers, like Black. And I was like,
Right.
oh, they're two white Scottish fellas make sort of heavy bass sounds. That's boom, ba, ba, da, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
To me, it transcends color, and I
Mm.
think that's a great thing. Um,
Totally, yeah.
Within the next context of the next question, with the equipment used to edit the sound of the video together, I would have presumed it was pretty much all of your making and sourcing the elements that you probably saw from YouTube, including that one with the monkeys on the cycle, which most people remember as the quintessential music video that was on Everything You Do as a Balloon.
Yeah.
Did you get any work from the Hexstatic boys for this
I
project?
didn't. I didn't. I did it all myself. I have to say the one exception is that video with the monkeys, cycling along to Everything You Can Do as a Balloon, which was a fan made video, as far as I'm aware, and was so brilliant and so perfect and so weird, so suited the music. Although I can't help thinking in hindsight it would have been better for the song Happy Cycling, but it's not very happy cycling, and happy cycling is about the LSD bike ride. So that's another topic. Um, so I took that video and I think I re-edited it slightly. It was a little bit different. They'd already re-edited it from the public information film, which I think is about 18 minutes, which is called One Called Fat. No, sorry, One Got Fat. And it's about the boy who survives, basically, because if you haven't seen the film, it's a series of 8 different teenagers with monkey masks riding quite dangerously and all meeting at different ends through reckless cycling. And one of the guys peels off right near the end, the guy without the monkey mask, and he's got all the sandwiches that they were going out to have a picnic with, and he ends up eating them all on his own, and he's the one that got fat.
Oh,
So that doesn't feature in my video, but the cycling accidents are part of it. And I mean, that track, Everything You Do Is Balloon, is probably my favorite boards track.
yeah.
Although it's hard to pick a winner from their catalog because there's so many.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for me, the first ever song I heard from them was Chromatica Dreamcoat. But over the years, I would say it's probably a weird toss-up between that one, 1969, See You Later, Bass Free. You could say An Eagle in Your Mind's a good one, because I tried playing it when, weirdly enough, I was at secondary school many, many years ago, and they were like, what on earth is all this? And they were just like saying, I love you. And one of the people got freaked out by one of the songs. It was like The Color of Fire. I
Yes.
love the fire because of the weird sort of high pitched ding ding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almost sounds like something out of um, Romero Giallo horror era stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's a Sesame Street sample that they slowed right down of kids. And in my mix, I don't know if you've heard the bleep mix, which I just put up, which I don't think it was actually in the live show that you saw, but in the new bleep mix that I've done of O is for Orange, I'd found the original source, which is kids speaking kind of normally. But for the color of the fire, the boards had slowed it right down and made it quite spooky. And it had that slightly fragmented sort of time stretch sound to the voice where they stretch out the syllables and it sort of reverberates and like almost like a tremolo. And that little ding ding is at the end of the Sesame Street sample, but slowed down obviously on their version.
Well, regarding the sources, you could corrupt something that makes it seem quite innocent, but turns into something much more darker. People tried doing this with in the form of animation. I mean, when people got into up in arms about Fritz the Cat or
Mm.
Ted, they look like kids' films, but they're not. Or,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's recontextualization, isn't it? They're taking something from a children's program and putting it with something quite dark and menacing sounding, or could be beautiful. It depends how you hear it. And then, yeah, slowing down a children's voice is kind of creepy.
oh, absolutely. I mean, they got into a bit of trouble for the whole sort of satanic element that they were accused of with GeoGaddy. I'm probably
Giuliani.
GeoGaddy. I
Yeah.
don't pronounce it correctly over these whole years. I bought an Virgin Megastore in 2008, and that album seems to freak people the hell out. For me, I really didn't take any heed to it at all.
Mm.
I thought it was genius. And that Devil is in the Details song, which you did play at the Faith and
Love that.
Strangers AV set, is I wish I could do a song just like that. Like Daffy Duck on ayahuasca or something. But
Yes, yes.
like I say with the drugs, don't do it, kids. Even
But
though
the funny thing about Giuliani is there were a couple of passages where they'd done stuff backwards. They'd played things that were obviously vocals or some sort of vocalization backwards, which is classically associated with messages from the devil. But I did a mix of Giuliani for a radio for the Solid Steel radio show in 2002, and sort of did a sort of condensed mega mix of the album as a lot of preview thing. And I ended up running backwards some of the backwards text on the album, and one of them is the teddy bear's picnic. It's actually that innocent that they'd reverse the song the teddy bear's picnic and put it into subtly into the background. And I love that about them. There's that playful element to them when you dig down, there's a lot of children's content in there, like that, TV shows, nursery rhymes, that sort of thing. But then, it's next to stuff about death cults like David Koresh and things like that, and 1969 in the Sunshine and things like that, Beautiful Place in the Country. All these little things that they juxtapose things really nicely to give you that sort of very uneasy balance.
I would say that a lot too. Sometimes they even might take it even further because, if I'm correct, someone they said that some of it sounds a bit like porn samples from the Julian Candy, Dawn Chorus. I know one very important thought was a little disclaimer that was sourced from a porno film, which, Mike and Marcus, I might have to question you a little bit there, but hey, whatever you did was very clever. And I always
Well, we
like quoting that bit from You'll See as a Juror in a Censorship Case.
Yes, I love that. I love that. That is from the end of a film, although I don't think it's from porno actually. But I do have my own story about that with because when I met Mike and Marcus, I'd heard the high scores or the Scam EP, whatever it's called, the first EP on Scam before they were with warp, and the end of very end of everything you do as a balloon, there's a very small little sort of guitar flourish, a sort of uh, and I knew what that was because I'd recognized it because I have the record. The original record is a John Abercrombie record called Timeless on ECM. And when I first asked them about this, oh, you got a bit of Timeless at the end of that track, and they said, oh, well, I don't know what you're talking about. We got that off of a porno. We recorded it from a porno film, hence the quality of it in the thing. So, fair enough.
Like a twangy sort of VHS aesthetic to it.
Yeah, but I sent that, but I had two copies of that record, so I sent them a copy, and they were like, "Oh, thank you so much. We've never heard the full thing. It's like 10 minutes long. This acoustic instrumental with Jan Hammer. It's a very sort of Boards of Canada sounding record. Anyway, it's a good jazz record."
I'll have to see what that one's about, because with regards to sources from BOC, I'm not always familiar with where Roots comes from. I know there was the Earth, Wind and Fire sample that allegedly there was a site called Who Sampled that was featured on 6010, and they're like, what? What should they? I'm going now.
Yeah.
Yeah. What? What should they? I'm going now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
I've never been properly be able to hear that. I know the one you're referring to, but it's an odd one. It could be that, or it could be something else. I mean, back then when I first met them, YouTube wasn't even a thing, and you certainly didn't have sites like Who Sampled, and you might have had the odd message board that was trying to identify this stuff, but it wasn't until in the noughties when YouTube came along, and suddenly you could get a lot of this Sesame Street stuff popping up and realize, oh, this is where it was from. But obviously I'd imagine they've got some sort of crazy tape or video archive that they're taking a lot of stuff from, which maybe they had when they were kids and living over there. Because none of that stuff's available on record.
They probably do. In their little Hexagon Sun shelter that we don't know about, although John Peel did try to infer, oh, so you're going to go in your secret lab, and they were just like saying, pardon the accent, oh no, we're off to the pub actually. Rich and Branson do get naked anyway. My Scottish accent's a bit terrible, but take my word for it. They're actually the best band from up there, to me, even more so than like Jesus and Mary Chain or Cocteau Twins, which I know a lot of people probably of your generation revere. My mother is a fan of the Jesus Mary Chain as well, but
right.
Boards Canada is my equivalent.
Yeah, for me too.
Hey, we can go there. There's also other good electronic bands as well up there, like Errors and even to some extent Mogwai, which some of their music can be a bit on the sort of spatial electronic end of things. Because some of the songs on Tomorrow's Harvest and Campfire Headphase almost sounds like it probably could have come out of Happy Songs for Happy People or Rock Team by Mogwai. I could be wrong on this.
I don't know. I'm not that familiar with their music, but I know, Boards are very into their indie, I think, in their youth. So, I'd imagine there was a huge indie scene up in Scotland, especially Glasgow as well.
Oh,
post labels and things like that. There's a lot of people. There's a great music scene in Glasgow still. Always has been.
Oh.
I know they're from Edinburgh, but I'm just saying, Scotland in general. It's not for lacking in music.
Oh no, not at all. Aztec Camera and Orange Juice, and associate some of the big names from up there. New Wave. That's more my parents' generation, but one can vouch for it. Moving on within the context of the next question, with some of the songs that I've noticed, not only do you got Ortega, I pronounce almost French style just by Ortega, and Broadcast, but you even put In Deep and Grandmaster Flash within the mix, which makes for quite interesting conversation because those are certainly more pop-oriented records.
Yeah, well, the In Deep Last Night a DJ Saved My Life is, if I'm not mistaken, is where they took the drum loop for Noglax from. I think I'm pronouncing that right as well. On the High Schools EP, it's the sort of steady drum beat rhythm. So that was the thinking behind that, is that I would, just paraphrase the vocal from In Deep and lay it over that quite long and extended build that track does. And it kind of works nicely in the DJ set because you've got the familiarity of the pop song over the top, and it's that contrast of early New York dance music, really, and disco, and then conversely with Grandmaster Flash at the same time. There's a version of the message which is actually not the original version. It's by Dataset, and it's a sort of mashup with an Italo disco record that he'd done and pitch shifted all the vocals, which is another thing that boards do. And I like the fact that it was a mashup of different things that I think maybe boards would have been listening to, in their youth as well, and would maybe, I'm sure they were influenced by hip hop, like a lot of people of my generation. Is that it was on the radar, and it all sort of went into the melting pot. You can hear little snatches of hip hop and funk and things in their music, especially the first album.
I would agree with that. Even like I said earlier on, some of the drum samples probably or beats almost sound a bit like early Wu-Tang Clan.
Oh, the beats on Boards records are amazing. Well, they've done so many remixes for Anticon and people like that, and all that side of the hip hop world. It's no surprise, really, if you listen to any of if you strip all their drum tracks out, which you can now do with software, they would make a great hip hop beat on any record.
Oh, absolutely. If I'm even correct, there's even like one or two rappers that tried using it, and then Frank Ocean made that Blonde album, which took a lot of sort of influences with the little interludes that they're often known for, and they put like some sort of ladies as a speech over, and it sounds a bit like that. And it's all a bit
Oh,
sort of
really? Oh, I haven't heard that. I heard the thing that who was Beyonce's sister did a track, didn't she?
Solange Knowles, I think.
Yes, that's it.
On
Yeah,
Left Side Drive, and I was like, what?
that's one. Yeah, yeah.
And
I should have actually put that in the mix. Actually, I completely forgotten about that track because it's quite good, isn't it?
it really is. It's very peaceful.
Mm.
It's almost a bit surreal because she's the sister of the famous R&B singer, Cowboy Carter. So I'm like, oh, it's got a lot of fans. But then again, BOC was even featured music-wise in Baby Driver, and that was a really successful movie. Of Shaun the Dead guy, Edgar Wright, and Sinister was featured in that, and many shorts of Salad Fingers, which is this cartoon on the internet or something. They played like what's that one? I can't remember the name. It's not A is to B is to C, but it's like.
You need to
Brilliant.
take this over your own impression of it, don't you, when it comes to edit the video?
Oh, absolutely.
But Edgar Wright's really into his music. He's Baby Driver's obviously, written around songs and music and stuff. But when he did Shaun of the Dead, he was massively into Ninja, and even Mr. Scruff is in Spaced and stuff like that and things. And there was a lot of Ninja posters in the background in Shaun of the Dead. And our press officer at the time, Vez, was actually in the movie as a zombie. So there's a connection there.
I noticed that when I saw it, I think the second time, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I was like, why is Fast Asleep featured on the wall? And then Lemon Jelly's Lost Horizons and several others, I'm like, what is this guy on? He's like the same stuff as me. And then he featured Kid Koala, of all things, who I interviewed, and he'd done that bit where it says, like, is he, yes, the R slur. No, he's a slow. And I'm like, okay, that was a bit disorienting. Probably he's reading my mind a little bit. I personalized it a little bit. I expect at any moment a movie I'll be making features a DJ Food poster, which I actually have.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Faith in Strangers.
It's courtesy, free of charge as well. So keep up the good work as far as I'm concerned. Now, I know with the next question about favorite BOC song, I think I've already mentioned that already, so I'll bypass and go to the bit that probably intrigued me the most out of all the visual pieces in the AV set was the one with BSAF, KLF, there's
Mm.
no sheep that are being killed.
Yeah,
And the CIA, FBI. It's
yeah,
like, wait, what is going on here? But it's all abbreviations of corporate and entity organizations. So it's almost a bit like Illuminati.
yeah. It's flash. The video, for those that haven't seen it, is a flash of three-letter. Is it acronym? Is that the right word for, EMI or BBC or AFX, KLF? Yeah, it's an Alvanoto track whose name it completely eludes me, but it's from a good 10 years ago. And it's just this very, very tense. It's got a sort of crunchy computer interference kind of buzz that goes along with it, and with this, very intense, fast, sort of minimalist techno beat, and it just has this very Germanic almost voice quoting all these initials from logos and flashing the logos up at the same time. And I just found that I can't really, I don't know whether that was it was sort of the mystery of that track and the intensity of that track that I really liked. And whilst I don't necessarily know if it fits in with Boards' aesthetic, certainly with some of their, slightly more techno-ish tracks, I would think. I just felt it fitted, and it's a great one live because it's a very visual thing, and the crowd, even if they haven't heard it, gets the concept very quickly. And it doesn't really do much; it just kind of goes along. And what I do in the set is I play it over a couple of different Boards tracks, which are quite slow and quite long, and they're big builders. So what that gives is a steady pulse and a sort of tension. And as the Boards tracks melodically build under it, because it's quite sparse, it works incredibly well. So that's kind of why that's in there.
Well, I think it's an appropriate choice. Not only does it have the weird, um, almost conspiratorial type sampling about it, but it's almost a bit subversive, really. Even when you put the KLF bit, that makes me laugh, particularly because of what they did on stage and burning pounds, millions. It's just like, well, what it also reminded me of, outside of the more subversive elements, was Cornelius, the Japanese electronic musician, done a song called The Typewriter Lesson, which I'm sure
Okay.
people who might be listeners probably don't know what it is, but it is a bit Borzacana in its unsettling surrealism, because it's saying YOU space
Yeah.
SNM space
Mm.
CIA space ROY. It's a bit
Yeah.
nightmarish, but it's a clever song in the vein of Devils in the Details or Julian Candy.
But you touched on the right word there. A sort of there's something slightly nightmarish about that track, and there's also something slightly nightmarish about Boards in certain tracks, but they have a brilliant way of putting on the edge of beauty as well. There's a very, very fine balance between beauty and unsettling, and they do it well. I think the only other artist that does it quite as well is maybe someone like David Sylvian, who has this sort of mournful beauty to some of his music, which could be seen as euphoric, could be seen as, well, yeah, very mournful, basically depressing, maybe.
Well, for some people within the more unsettling camp, I know they say about that Aphex Twin. I mean, that album cover with Richard D. James
Yeah.
gave me nightmares as a child. And then the Prodigy album, Music for the Jilted Generation, that scared me as a young boy, even though I was obsessed with it because my mother had it on CD, and I was like, I wanted, kept hearing "No Good for Me" and
Yeah.
um, what's that one? What we're doing is the
Sparta.
Voodoo People.
Do the people. Right, right.
And it's just the artwork and the sort of sound of it was just amazing. And some people probably would be frightened by it just because it's a bit over the top and theatrical. But I would say, as far as I'm concerned, the most unsettling song ever made is probably 54 Camera Beats Aphex did. which is just absolute noise. It's almost made me deaf a little bit. And then Ventolin, great song within BOC circles. It'd be Color of the Fire. That would be their standout one, even though that's not as sinister as probably some might say like Julian Candy because it's got that weird porn sample, or
Yeah.
Devils in the Details, which I personally thought was funny because I grew up on sort of like Tim Burton films and stuff. And you probably grew up with like Exorcist and Video Nasties when you were a young lad, but you didn't want to tell your parents you were watching. I
Well,
mean,
you didn't watch those kind of things in the parents' house, you know. You watched them at your friend's house when the parents were out.
oh yeah, it's like Evil Dead or the Zombie Flesh Eaters, which probably
Yeah,
they probably were influenced by the same sort of stuff as well. Like I said about the giallo, Giorgio Romero elements
yeah,
about it in more or less Tomorrow's Harvest and Geo Gaddy, not
yeah.
Geo Gaddy.
Well, that's how I say it. Maybe it is Gyogadi. I don't know.
Well, I just like pronounce things a little bit differently. For people who listen to the AV set or your mixes, what do you hope to get from the public who may not be as familiar with Boards of Canada or that ambient sound? What do you want people to take from it?
I'm not really sure. That's quite a good question. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know. I mean, hopefully they learn a few things. They learn where a few samples came from. Maybe they'll hear some new music. That's always the intention of every DJ is to present their taste in music to an audience, and hopefully they will take some of that and they go, "What's that track? I really like that. I need to track that down, or I need to investigate this group more." And this isn't a total exercise in nostalgia and playing the old hits and things like that. It's sort of it's bringing things into the present a little bit. There's a couple of new tracks in there, more up to date things that boards have actually influenced or remixed as well. So, but yeah, just yeah, bringing new songs to new ears really is the crux of it. Maybe some people haven't heard Autechre, but they've heard Boards of Canada. I'd be very surprised if they haven't heard Autechre. But Jan Hammer is a good example. There's a track by Jan Hammer called "Don't You Know," which is it's kind of a digger's classic, and if you're into hip hop, you're going to know this. But it's got, I wouldn't be surprised if he's using the same synths as Boards of Canada, and it's got a very sort of funky backbeat with this kind of burbling synth. He's singing about love, which is something that crops up in The Color of the Fire, and I've juxtaposed the two in the mix. And there's I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of references to love throughout the mix at different parts. There's references to orange, the color, obviously that's the title. There's lots of numbers, and colors and things like that. So if you're really paying attention, you can listen to the mix once and you can go back and you can kind of spot all these little other things that I've buried in there. And I've attempted to do what I think is a similar thing to the band, in that they bury details into their mix. The devil is in the details is a well-named track.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the thing that makes for very active listening, in that you have to hear not only the weird little harmonics that are occurring, but also the few little sort of cryptic elements within the references that they may be hinting at, which is almost like what people would perceive at the back in the day, I would presume, with Pink Floyd when they were listening to The Wall or Animals, Dark Side of the Moon. They'll be hearing like, what are they trying to signify here? Or that little spoken word bit on us versus us and them. Like, what does it have to do with the concept of free will, man? Or that sort of thing. I'm sure they, like you and Mike and Marcus, were probably influenced a lot by the prog rock stuff.
Bits and pieces.
There's some sort of weird overlap because the songs do seem to carry a thread. They're not as long as a prog rock song, but they have that sort of idea.
Yeah, I always like things that make you think a bit deeper, and maybe go away and look something up. Maybe there's a reference in a title or in a sample, which will send you off to the internet. I'm that sort of person. I'm a sort of digger and a researcher and a collector, and I kind of like to know the story behind. One of my favorite things in music documentaries where you find out how they made this song, why they made it like that, what that lyric means, what they used. I kind of want to look behind the curtain a little bit sometimes, and that's the classic thing with Boards' music is that they don't ever show you that. They've never showed their studio, to my knowledge. They don't really give interviews anymore, and that just fuels speculation, and it also fuels the myth. And that's why I think, in the same way as with Aphex, there's a legion of fans out there trying to work out what's going on, what the details are, and what that means, and look for a deeper meaning.
I would agree with that absolutely. It not only helps with the record sales for vinyl, but also creates a bit of a sort of following amongst the public to wonder, wait, where are they coming from with this? Why is it called this particularly? I think that makes for quite intriguing listening because you can't always do that necessarily with, let's say, no offense to um, Felix and the other bloke from Basement Jacks. Those are songs you just saw a groove to, but you don't always think about the end result. Although one could wonder what they were getting at with the monkeys from Where Is Your Head At and the subtle anti-war themes from Kish Cash, which had Susie Sue and Banshees. Boards of Canada is not one of those types of bands you sort of have to dig your head in, even put like a helmet on, sort of be in your own space. And in a more spatial level, you got the more sort of dense stuff like BOC. The Ninja Tune equivalent, you could say maybe like Amon Tobin.
I don't think there's anyone like Boards of Canada, to be honest. Certainly not on Ninja Tune. But I like that juxtaposition of Boards of Canada with Basement Jacks there. I mean, the things that you quoted, they're pop culture references for Boards of Canada, Basement Jacks. Susie Sue, Where's Your Head Out samples. I think Gary Newman, doesn't it? And they're wearing their their pop history and their probably what they were brought up on their sleeve and things like that. And I think with Mike and Marcus's stuff, it's a lot deeper than that. In not saying they weren't into this stuff when they were the kids or anything like that, but they're digging deeper and they're burying those details in the songs as well. And that's an obvious difference between the two.
Oh, absolutely. Well, as far as I'm concerned, everyone has their own little styles. And I think that's the great thing about it. I know with that investigative element within the music itself, I don't always pick up on what source of the samples that they come from, because I always like hearing sort of the melodies and the beats that go along with it. But as often is the case with a lot of sort of ambient mellow music, there are very many influences. And as far as I'm concerned, that makes for very compelling listening. I mean, even some of the most famous groups like Air and for a brief moment you had Milo with his Destroy Rock and Roll CD. I was like, wow, I didn't know they went with that particular detail. I could be wrong on this, but I always like being intrigued by the little sound details. Even with your homeboys at Ninja Tune, like with Mr. Scruff, I was always a bit curious as to with the animation and the Potato Men sort of designs, which I find quite amusing. Well, for many people, they always say it's very 70s. And they're not wrong on this. I mean, a lot of that music certainly is referenced by sort of that 70s aesthetic. You could almost see the sepia
Yeah,
tone
yeah,
from
yeah.
a distance. And even the smell of dusted Betamax tapes coming on your way. And I think that makes for quite interesting listening and conversation. I
I
would,
always think it's an analog world, basically. It's a pre-digital world with boards. It's slightly fuzzy, it's slightly grainy, it's slightly yellowed rather than pale, bright white. And it's got a sort of soft blur to it.
I would say that too. It's not so sort of digital. Like, well, I'm trying not to always keep naming artists here and there. Orteca to me sounds very digital.
Mm,
BFC is very analog as far as I'm
mm.
concerned. In some respect, maybe even like cinematic orchestra. has that sort of analog touch to it, because to me it sounds like jazz music, even
Yeah.
though they always get put in the dance section, but they're their own thing. I wish they. I know BOC has complained in the past about why they keep being put in the dance section, because their music to me sort of can transcend genres. Even people have complained about Campfire Headface being a little too sort of folksy, uh,
Mm.
small soft rock sound, almost like uh, Seals and Crofts at places. I could be wrong on this. I'm just naming
I
bands
don't know
to
anything. So,
sort of show my music knowledge a little bit. You know, when people think sort of folktronica, they think David Gray or maybe even Badly Drawn Boy, but I don't think that's a fair comparison. Um, to me, Campfire Headphase is their greatest album they've ever done. It's also one of the first albums I ever bought from them, and that was at the Blue Water Shopping Centre in Dartford in Kent. I will never forget that was almost 20 years ago, and I used my own money from recycling to buy that album. And my father just didn't quite understand why I wanted to get it, along with the Hacienda Classics compilation on 3 discs. I was like, I want to get this now because I heard on Music Choice, and you can't stop me. I was also obsessed with Lemon Jelly at around the same time as well, and they kept playing a lot of the songs from those two bands on Music Choice as well as MTV Dance. Um, is it wrong to say that I got a lot of my education from this version of music through MTV Dance? Because I don't know if you had Sky or
no,
NTL
I didn't.
in the 2000s, but they always had these at like 6 or 7 or 8 in the morning or on Sunday mornings. They would always play sort of like ambient music, and a lot of these sort of bands would come up from your label and Warp, and I'm like, this is amazing. Every now and again they'll play Gorillaz and then the Beloved, which I was like, aren't the Beloved, they're a bit pop. Even Madonna's Justify My Love Uncut was played during those hours, and I was like, that's a bit racy. But they played it, and I learned to appreciate the trip hop sound, and this was the genesis of all that, and more or less kickstarted around like '04, '05, when I
Mm.
was hearing Royksop's Melody AM on repeat anytime I'm at shops, and you hear like Apple, and you're like, blue on blue, heartache from heartache, and then Massive Attacks. You're the book that I came open, and I don't hear about it no much more. I'm sorry, I'm getting a
You're
little.
digressing, Mark. You're digressing.
We're gonna end it with this.
Possibly regressing as well.
I think people love the humor element about it. I mean, I did this with Kid Koala. I was like, we're nerds, but we're not the same that we are. I
Yeah.
don't know how he does it with turntables. I know for you, you're certainly not as sort of scratch heavy as he is, but I
Yeah.
like the more sort of jazzy, down tempo aspects of the DJ Food sound, which I think that's quintessential Ninja.
Mm. Indeed, yes.
To wear the shirt to support my homies. I'm going to end this interview with one last question, because I know I'm sounding like a weird fanboy. I even did this when I was meeting Luke Vibert at the same venue as you. I was like, "Oh, you met this band? Oh, how did you do It's Always Now and Sorry I Make You Lush?" In a pub meet, if you ever met Mike and Marcus again, who do you think would win at a pub quiz of all, between the two Sanderson brothers and you?
It depends what you were being quizzed about. I mean, if it was about football, I'd lose hands down. But I don't know. If it was a bit more evenly matched and it was about music, I might be able to give them a run for their money. I don't know, is the
Well,
honest answer.
I'm going to place my bets. I'm going to get some cash on me. I'm going to put £20 that you win on that quiz. Because you got a very taste of interest. The fact that you even played on the AV set, not only a lot of the BOC stuff, but also at that one song from the Amber album on Autecle. So I
Mm.
pronounce it weird. And then the broadcast song, Rest in Peace, Trish,
Mm. Yeah.
is really something. I thought, damn, this guy knows his stuff. I don't know how he does it. the way I see it, I just like that you played a lot of the songs from BOC and made it together as almost like an homage piece in many ways. And I was even meaning to see this event many years ago when I first heard about it, but unfortunately I was living abroad at the time, and I was kind of broke, and that wasn't possible. But thankfully, later in life, older, with grey hair, I finally got to fulfill one of my dreams of seeing Ninja Tune and Warp in, as John Marsh from The Beloved would say, sweet harmony. And I can't thank you more than enough, Mr. Folks, or otherwise known as Strictly Kev. And
Thank you, Mark.
keep up the good work. And thank you for letting me have the opportunity to do this interview. And tell Mike and Marcus, if they're ever around, and also with Eric and James, Kiko and Funk Puccino, I said hi. And the best of luck.
All right. Cheers, Mark. Thanks for talking.